Climate change is a global issue requiring a global response. Right now, science is telling us two fundamental things. First, that in order to slow and reverse the trend of global climate change, we need to reduce global greenhouse gas emissions to net zero by 2050 or shortly thereafter. This is a huge undertaking that will require the participation of most of the major economies around the world. Second, the unavoidable impacts of global climate change, things like sea level rise, floods, droughts, stronger storms, will have profound impacts on the natural environment, on human health and well-being, on national security, and on the economy more broadly.
The security community in the United States has long thought about climate change as an accelerant to conflict. That can be due to poor governance in countries that are weak. It can be due to creating new opportunities for geopolitical competitors to reach into new parts of the globe like the Arctic. One of the biggest areas of challenge is really around where the United States has its forces postured overseas and here at home. And a lot of those locations are subject to effects of climate change. Those vulnerabilities really affect both how much it costs to maintain our forces, but also how we are able to deploy them. That's a big concern going forward.
Trade, by definition, crosses borders. So the environmental implications of trade are enormous. The key ways that trade impacts climate change are largely the manufacturing process and transportation. Climate change is so pervasive and carbon emissions are so ubiquitous that a single country doing a single thing is not going to solve the problem. Countries need to work together, and one of the things they need to work together on is common approaches that will send the same signals, both incentives and disincentives, to manufacturers and service providers globally about how they need to change their behavior.
What has been underappreciated until recently are the transition risks associated with adapting to climate change. And here you'll have financial sector participants in particular paying attention to what might be the regulatory impacts to changes stemming from adaptation to climate change, and also concern that there could be unforeseen financial consequences if there's a rapid change in regulation or a rapid change in the actions of either consumers or investors.
So we know that around the world, shocks and stresses arising from climate change are putting even more pressure on global food systems. More intense rainfall patterns, increased periods of drought, and deteriorating soil conditions all describe some of the most important challenges we're facing. For a number of years, the U.S. has been a leader in global food security. Amidst increasing challenges from climate change, there's a great need for the U.S. to advance its leadership and provide even more investments for climate change adaptation.
The accelerating and devastating velocity of climate change has huge health security impacts, creating disorder and stimulating mass migration. Whether we're talking about flooding and the disruptions, particularly along coastal communities, whether we're talking about rising temperatures and what that does in terms of creating environments for cholera and the spread of malaria. All of these things are highly disruptive and can overwhelm health systems and lead to the degradation of the health status of these populations.
Lots of people think about climate change as just an environmental issue or just an energy issue, when in reality, the changes that we're going to see in the global climate and the way that we're going to need to respond to them have the ability to reshape international relationships and are deeply intertwined with various aspects of U.S. foreign policy.
In the next 5 years, India will become the most populous country on Earth. And in the next 20 years, will most likely be the third or fourth largest economy on Earth. Industry as a percent of GDP is only about 15 to 20% of India's economy. Expecting that it'll follow a development path similar to other countries and begin to build manufacturing, then meeting decarbonization goals is going to be extremely difficult. The United States and other partners need to look at India through two lenses. Need to engage the central government and make sure that they're making substantive commitments to try to decarbonize as they grow. At the same time, most energy decisions are actually taken by Indian states. So there's 28 different pathways to try to see what India's carbon future is going to look like. So for the United States and any other government that's engaging India, hoping to see better outcomes, You need to engage Delhi, but you need to get to the States as well.
China's both the world's leading emitter of carbon and also the world's leading source of technologies to address climate change. Effectively reducing carbon emissions and slowing climate change, and then effectively responding to the climate change that is occurring, is going to require China to play a role, and it's going to require the US and China to work together as much as possible.
Asia will be impacted more than any other part of the world by climate change. Estimates are that 4 out of 5 people impacted by coastal flooding will be in Asia. The geopolitical problems of Asia, the intense competition, rivalry, territorial disputes are all being exacerbated by climate change. At CSIS, the Asia team surveys strategic elites across Asia every few years. In Southeast Asia, when we ask what's the greatest security threat you face, the #1 answer is climate change. With China, Japan, Korea, climate change is still 3 or 4 on the list. They know it's important. When we, the United States, think about how do we lead in Asia, we need to do and say something about climate. Because if we don't, we're not selling ourselves as the responsible, stabilizing force in Asia that we've always been.
The U.S. has a great opportunity to engage with developing countries in ways that help us foster connections, create American jobs, and promote soft power connections by engaging on this issue. Right now, we're sitting on the sidelines watching other countries engage with other parts of the world on this issue, and it's to our detriment and to the detriment of our partners.
The ocean is changing before our very eyes. For people who rely on the marine environment, this means that food resources are becoming unreliable, economic opportunities uncertain, and traditional ways of life are being threatened. Taken together, these impacts threaten stability, stifle opportunity, and increase the risk of new conflicts.
Today, the Arctic is warming 2 to 3 times faster than any place on the planet. What we are seeing is a climate alarm in the Arctic. A mass shedding of the Greenland ice sheet, which is a direct cause of sea level rise. We have diminishment of the polar ice cap, permafrost thaw that is devastating very small villages and towns and infrastructure. So the change is dramatic and impacts 4 million people that live in the Arctic, but is also, as this permafrost thaw begins, the potential methane release globally could accelerate climate change beyond any imagination.
Over the course of its history, the United States has wavered in its international engagement, sometimes leading the global community and other times taking a back seat or, in fact, hindering deeper engagement on the way that the U.S. engages on this issue. That's not only an irresponsible position for us to take, it's one that is contrary to our national interests. By engaging more deeply on these issues, the United States can not only make the world a safer place, but we can create new opportunities for ourselves. We can convey important strategic benefits to our citizenry, to our companies, to our states and local officials. These are important opportunities to take advantage of. We here at CSIS believe that we can create a more durable foreign policy framework as it relates to global climate change. We in the United States have all the tools we need to be able to engage on this issue on a more consistent basis. All we really need to do is decide to lead.